today, it's just me and Shayla. Shelby couldn't join us today because she's got a busy schedule. So it's me and Shay today, and then next episode is going to be me and Shelby. And if you can't figure out who's talking, it's Hayleigh.
And I'm Shaela. Welcome to the Pick Me, Choose Me podcast. For those of you who are listening to for the first time, we're just a couple of Grays fans with a little bit of first aid knowledge. Hayleigh's about to take her MCAT to go into med school. Shelby, who's not here right now, is in nursing school. And me, Shayla, I'm a journalist, so I try to focus more on the storytelling aspect, but sometimes I'm just here for the ride.
A couple snarky comments here and there.
A couple feminist quips,
All the good stuff. Well, on that topic, I think the theme for this episode is badass bitches.
Do you?
Oh, what do you think the theme is?
I think it's people pushing their luck in their first month at work.
Actually, that's true. There's very few things in this episode.
I wouldn't call it much of what they're doing badass, except for maybe Isabel.
Okay.
Stevens.
Yeah. Izzy, we'll get to her. I wrote this down in the beginning of the episode when Yang pulls in on her motorbike and Bailey's also being a badass and not accepting a mocha bribe.
I did say at my very first note for the episode is I loved Christina's motorcycle days. Because they don't last forever, but man, do I love when she's just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah. So speaking of feminism, in one of the first scenes at 1:32, you kind of hear the overview, and Meredith talking in her monologue says, "The line separating you from the people you work with." And that's timed perfectly with a shot with Izzy arriving at work and looking onto the elevator as it opens, and there's just a bunch of men. And all of them are males working in healthcare. And at the time, it was 2005. So there was even a bigger divide between men and women in medicine and how few women there are. And I like that they're consistently addressing this.
Yeah, it's a nice little subtle visual metaphor there.
Mm-hmm. And there is still some discrepancies, but nowadays in 2020, it's actually not that bad. This is the first time in history when there's more women in medical school than men.
Go girls.
At 1:46, we see the foreshadowing of the shoes.
Yeah, you want to know my exact words in my note for that? Sorry, not sorry, but Mare's shoes are ugly in all caps.
Yet the clothes in this first season date the show so hard.
I mean, they do for any show that you can always tell the early 2000s because of the clothing and the makeup. I distinctly remember watching One Tree Hill and the low rise tight jeans and the coral lipstick. I'm like, ooh.
Oh, Meredith's turtleneck with her tan blazer. Oh, no.
I even have, it's way at the end, but the very, very end scene, the fade out, I literally wrote Meredith's hairstyle is so early 2000s.
Yeah. So also I noticed in that scene, Meredith is a Democrat, which from later seasons, we can pick up on that from the things she does. But she puts up a roommate sign, and on the sign it says, 2 nice rooms with shared bath available immediately, close to Seattle Grace, ... Non-smokers only, please. No pets, and absolutely no Bush supporters need apply.
I definitely didn't pick up on that on the first 5 times I've watched this series through. Yeah. Way later in the seasons, we discover more on that. I would love for Shonda Rhimes to really throw one zinger in at Trump for this next upcoming season. But
yeah, I'm waiting for that. And then she's interviewing her roommates. And there's something that I kind of caught. So she asks the girl who she's interviewing to be her roommate where she was when the Challenger exploded. And the girl responds that she was in kindergarten. But I did the math. Meredith Grey was born in 1978, and the Challenger exploded in 1986. Meredith was 8. The woman she was talking to was in kindergarten. Meredith is like 2 years older than her. She would have been in like grade 2. So I just thought that was a funny little catch. I don't know if they totally had thought her year of birth through, but...
Another little thing when it comes to the roommate applications, at one point George is explaining why he has to move out, why he really wants to move in. And he says that his mom cleans his scrubs for him. And that made me pause. Why do they have locker rooms that they come and change into their scrubs? Don't they leave their scrubs at the hospital for a laundry service? Or do they take them home and get them washed? And if so, why don't you... I guess for sanitary reasons, not for your car.
There is a reason for this, and it was actually Shelby who told me this. Is often you pack your own scrubs home because they're your personal scrubs, but if you are out in public in your scrubs, you have a duty. If anything happens, if there's an accident, you have to respond. If something happens, you have to be there. Someone overdoses, you have to be first in line to help because people have trust in the scrubs. And if something happens and they see someone in scrubs standing by, it looks bad on all of the profession and it makes people not trust in the scrubs. So it's kind of a professionality standpoint where they don't want you just wearing your scrubs out and about.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering about that because I know they do have a laundry service, obviously, like after surgery, they can strip their scrubs and leave them at the hospital and get them washed, I think. Or wash them there. I have no idea. I think in later seasons they kind of explain that, but I was just curious. Also, George is like, what, 28?
Yeah, they're all in their like late 20s. I think
I don't blame. I mean, the fact that his mom is still doing his laundry for him and he's 28, super kind of her because I'm sure he's busy as hell. But I can see why he's like, get me out.
And then we get to 402, which is the elevator makeout. And Derek is flirting with Meredith. And I gotta say, I do have a little bit of a struggle with when Derek says, I didn't know that Seattle has ferry boats. And Meredith kind of answered that for me. She's like, Seattle's surrounded by water at 3 sides. But I'm like, come on. It is a coastal city. It's gonna have ferry boats.
Also, for a man from Manhattan, which is an island, you should know a little bit more about coastal cities.
Yeah. And then something I also noticed about Derek's scrubs that gets me a little bit. Why is the V-neck on the scrub so low? It's like he got a scrub top like that's too big so he can like tuck it in to show his waist. But it's like, it's so low. You can see his chest hair. I'm like, no.
Not sanitary, but I would say yes.
I love this elevator scene just because it's iconic, but it's also like the world's slowest elevator, except for when it shuts on that poor nurse who's trying to get in on time.
Mm-hmm. The music they pick is really good for it too. It's like the do-do-do and the pauses and...
Yeah, the music's always really good in Grey's Anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
Are we on to when the patient comes in?
Yes, we are on to when Allison, our poor rape victim, comes in.
Yes, and I wrote in my notes, the ball is in Shelby's court here. Shelby is not here, so I'm going to go off of my very, very vague, non-specific knowledge of this when they are talking about how her right pupil is dilated, which is a sign of brain injury, and they said that it is blunt head trauma. And I just wanted to add in a little fun fact. Not really fun, but closed head injury is the leading cause of brain damage in young adults.
That's the number one thing you look out for a head trauma too, is the pupils. I mean, as a lifeguard, whenever we were dealing with spinal or potential spinal or head injuries, first things first was that pen light came out to check the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after, of course, you had them in a secure spinal hold.
Then we're in the surgery. And I really hate to
before we get there, sorry, I just have to interrupt you. When he comes in, maybe it is in the surgery, but Derek says we should castrate him. I caught that line. Like, he literally said we should castrate him in terms of the man who raped Allison, the rape victim. I'm like, that's a wonderful, wonderful little sneaky bit of foreshadowing.
Because Allison beat him to it?
Yeah, in the form of, like, and it's literally, like, maybe 2 minutes before they, like, find the penis.
Yeah, and I really hate to burst your bubble, Shay. The pink flower and scrub cap.
Yeah, it comes back. I see it. I mean...
Wait, you didn't watch the second episode before the first? I just remember the leopard print one. That's the one that sticks with me the most. And then I like that when they're in the surgery, Meredith makes sure that they all know that the victim's name is Allison.
Yes.
And names have power in a situation like this. I think it's granting a little bit more power back to Allison, even though she's not conscious at the time, because then she's not just what happened to her. Mm-hmm. That isn't who she is. And Shonda Rhimes has such a talent for balancing the right amount of humor and darkness in the show, because, I mean, it's not really comedic, because you're straight up disheartened and depressed after this happened to this poor woman. And after a really powerful scene, they find a penis in her stomach, and it's a tiny bit of comedic relief.
Just a note on when they find the penis. Did you notice that every camera angle and shot, they never showed anything past, like, the midpoint on Burke's, like, forceps or whatever it was? Like, you couldn't see anything. Even if they didn't even have a prop, anything, or if they did, you couldn't see it because it was, like, framed behind the IV bag. So I'm like, I noticed how they were very, very careful to not show anything. And I don't know whether this was just because, A, it would be too difficult to try to visualize and come up with, or B, at that time they were following television content regulations where they couldn't show certain aspects of nudity and, like, human genitalia.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the latter, because they don't shy away from some pretty gruesome surgery scenes later.
Yeah.
And, like, they don't seem to have a problem trying to gross you out. So the interns all get their assignments. O'Malley is on the code team. And he's so bright and hopeful. O'Malley, he has my heart, because he has that enthusiasm that everybody goes into med school, the pretty little ones. And this is why I love the name Bambi. And this is when we first hear it. And at 8:42, his line when Yang bursts his bubble, and he's like, I don't like you.
Yeah. It's so quintessential George O'Malley that it just makes my heart ache. Also, I mean, I mention it far later on, when Christina kind of tries to talk George down from being too upset. And she's like, most of the time when they're coding, they're like 95% of them are already, like, on the brink. And George is like, what? Why would nobody tell me? And I'm like, I get that you're very, very hopeful and bright-eyed and Bambi, George. But also, how did you go through the entirety of med school without anybody telling you this?
Yeah.
Or you reading this at some point and knowing the statistics of somebody coming out of a code situation?
Yeah, you should know this.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm trying to read Shelby's mind telepathically, though she's not here. And this is the code team that she was talking about last episode. And if you haven't listened to that, make sure you go back and you do. But I wonder why there's a code team in this episode and not the last episode. And I'm just going to assume because the previous episode was the pilot and they can't attach too many strings to it.
And who knows, at this point, maybe they ran it by producers and networks. And then I know that Grey's Anatomy is pretty famous for hiring an actual team of, like, doctors and nurses to be consultants in their screenwriting and directing. So maybe the second episode was the point where they had picked up coordinators to instruct them, be like, oh, this is actually how it would operate in a hospital.
Yeah, that would make sense. That's kind of along the lines in what I was thinking, is because it's really hard to base an entire series off the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that we're kind of getting into the flow of the show a little bit. So then we get to when Yang and Alex are delivering lab results together. And they really don't have a huge role in this episode, other than poor patient etiquette. That's pretty much what it is. I do like the Yang and Alex dynamic, but everything they do throughout this episode is wrong.
Though, I would like to point out, like Shelby would say last episode, that the surgeons are doing the work of basically every other hospital personnel at this point. So when Yang's like, I shouldn't be delivering lab results. You're right, Yang. There's probably like other people who go into that room before you do as the surgeon or the surgical intern.
Maybe post-op results your surgeons would present to you, but also their residents should be with them too. So it's just, it's Grey's Anatomy. I think that's an explanation in itself.
It puts the good humor into it by having her and Alex be so back and forth. But yeah, you're right. It's a lot of what they do is super unprofessional.
Yeah. So I'm going to get all my dumping on them over and done with. They did everything you're not supposed to do. They talk in a medical jargon, that the patient would have a difficulty understanding. And as Shelby said, the nurse probably has to go back in after and explain it to the patients. And this is not how you talk to patients. This is not the right communication. Do better, Yang and Alex. Do better.
Yeah, and then we come upon Richard explaining to Meredith that she has to be the one to keep the penis with her the entire time, which I have two comments on. One, Richard's assistant asks, "Can I see it?" Hilarious. Okay, that's just a little side note. Two, I get that there's like a chain of custody, but would it actually be with the surgeon, or would it not be with one of the other doctors, nurses, somebody who is in that operating room as well, that would not be required as much as a surgeon or surgical intern?
Or would it not just be easier to send her down to the police station to give it to the police and then come back and do her job?
Right, exactly. Obviously it adds a great deal of comedy to just have her carry around a penis all day and most of the night, but still, I'm sure that Meredith either A, wouldn't be the one left in charge of watching it for that long, or B, they'd have other ways to go about it that was more convenient than her having to tote it around with her. Because even if she was toting it around with her, wouldn't it be inappropriate for her to go see other patients while she had that with her?
Oh, 1,000%. 1,000%.
So,
and going to the nursery with all the babies. I'm just going to carry this severed penis in with the babies as I go and cross lines that I shouldn't and go see someone else's patient.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk about Izzy Stevens for a moment because she has her patient who can't speak English. And I want to say my favorite scene, even though it's not even really an Izzy scene, is when Izzy asks Yang to translate into Chinese. And Yang is so offended. She's like, the only Chinese I know is from Mr. Ching's menu.
Yes.
And I
did write down that was a little bit of passive racism to just assume that the only Asian she knew spoke the Asian dialect that was being spoken by her patient. But it was
a little bit of
and then
ignorance.
She was like a bit whiny when Yang's like, I can't. And she's like, but why?
Yeah, Izzy annoying the living crap out of me is going to be a recurring theme throughout the series, but she did pretty good this episode.
Yeah,
and she did Izzy have and Attagirl.
She did have a lot of patience for that patient who she couldn't understand.
Oh, yeah. Izzy is a very kind and patient person, and she cares very, very deeply for her patients. And that's what gets her caught, is sometimes she cares too much. And every single time, that's what gets her caught. I'm not a fan of her usually because she gets way too personal, but I do support her actions here and where she did what a doctor's supposed to do, which is it puts her own personal opinions aside, whether you believe in illegal immigration or not, and it's wrong. You are a doctor first, and caring for someone who is injured or sick is always your first responsibility. And she followed that responsibility, and I commend and respect her for it.
I definitely agree with all of those statements. Another thing, and I'm not certain of this because I've never worked in a hospital. I never plan on working in a hospital. But I believe big hospitals, I believe they have translators either on call in the building or like available to them via phone call, and they're paid literally to help them with translating.
And they do. Actually, it's addressed in this episode. See, that's why Izzy is saying that she can't get a hold of the translator, or the translator's running late. I can't remember specifically, but she tried contacting the translator, and the translator is essentially tied up and can't help at the moment. But now, and maybe because it's 2005, they didn't have this at the time. Now it would more commonly be a phone call or FaceTime. Turn off your Siri.
If you heard that, it's because my Siri randomly went off.
I hate when you talk and then you know they're listening and then they just turn on.
Yeah, mine's like, I'm sorry. Like, yeah, I didn't catch that phrase I was eavesdropping in on.
I always will yell at you. I'm like, hey Shay, or hey Shayla. And they always think I'm saying Siri for some reason.
Yeah, they often autocorrect my name to Sharks when I say it.
I noticed that too.
It used to be my nickname from some coworkers at the pool, actually. They'd call me Sharks when it came in. Because when they try to message me, it'd be like, hey, Sharks. I mean, could be worse things. It could be Sharks.
Is it inaccurate?
Shark.
If you want to be a shark, be a shark.
I will.
So, my only negative thought about Izzy in this scene, or in her entire stint in this episode, is I was thinking of infection when she's doing the stitches out in the rain. And I know she couldn't do anything for the situation because she didn't want to come inside. But the little cellular biologist inside of me was cringing so hard. I'm like, inflammation, infection, dirty water behind the dumpsters.
Well, if we're skipping to the whole Izzy storyline, plotline during this episode, I have a few notes. One, life as an illegal immigrant would be really, really hard and frustrating. And I'm sorry, but I'm sure these people have gone through a lot to get over here. Obviously, if they're willing to risk everything to cross a border. And some of them, it's a hard life. Like this person, they are seriously injured, possibly maimed, but they refuse to seek medical treatment inside the building in case of deportation or getting caught by ICE. And it's just...
Yeah. Getting your forehead stitched behind a dumpster in the rain is better than going back to where they're from.
Yeah, exactly. I also note on the Izzy stitching her up and taking care of her. Like, I'm so proud of Izzy for doing this, like we mentioned earlier. But you were saying in terms of like sanitary reasons because of the biology aspects and all that. I, as a former lifeguard, we dealt with a lot of blood and cut and scrapes, and sometimes you have your items that need to go in the biohazard bin, right? Izzy literally gathers up the pile of biohazardous waste or whatever, the biomedical waste, so the blood, the gauze, everything like this, and then she touches her face. She scratches her nose.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, she does. And she's not wearing, like, I don't think she's wearing gloves. I can't remember. But either way, she directly touched the waist, the biomedical waist, and then touches her face. Hold on. She does it a second time when she turns around and is about to go back into the building. So all I have just written is eek, because that's super not okay.
I mean, you have to treat, like Shelby said last episode, all patients as if they have something that you could catch something from. And you have to treat all patients, whether they have a bloodborne disease or not. But especially, she has no idea what the medical history of this patient is. She could have HIV. You would never know.
Yeah, I just had to point that out because I was like, oh my God, she touched her face not once, but twice after gathering up that bundle of blood and gauze and hazardous waste.
At least take off your gloves first.
Yeah, something. But I mean, I just hope she washed her hands first thing when she got back in the hospital.
I kind of want to talk about the baby diagnosis. Do you want to talk about the baby diagnosis with me?
Can we talk about Burke getting yelled at by Richard first?
Yes. Oh, someone needed to put that man in his place.
Because I was like, Richard looks really young. Don't know if the mustache is working for him, but regardless, I was just really happy to see Richard hand Burke's ass back to him because Burke is acting like a child, pouting like, why would you bring Derek here? I thought I was your number one man. I thought I was getting your job.
And the entitlement. He's like, Chief is mine. Like, I'm like, bitch, there is a due process.
Yeah. And when Richard just like gives it back to him, I'm like, snaps. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that kind of, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I love when Burke finally got his reality check and he asks Bailey, he's like,
yes.
Do you think I'm bossy and stuff like that? And he's like, and she freaking goes off and she's like, no, I still have 20 more seconds. This is why I thought the theme was boss ass bitch, mainly because Bailey.
Mm-hmm. I actually wrote exact word for word. Bailey telling Burke off is the best part of this episode.
Yeah. Bailey is one of the best characters in the first season.
Okay. Now you can move on to the baby diagnosis and Meredith definitely stepping out of bounds.
The George and Meredith dynamic in general just makes me feel very warm and fuzzy inside. Mm-hmm. And I love how before they go to the nursery, the show heavily implies that they're hooking up. Like yes. That, I told you last time was the last time. And it's very typical. It's sick and wrong. But they're really just going to the nursery to watch babies instead. And I mean, kudos to them, but I do not go around babies to de-stress. Like, babies are stressful. That's not a thing I would do. No, babies and me don't mix.
But I also feel like that says, like, so much about George O'Malley as a character and his personality. Is the fact that he genuinely feels calmed and enjoys watching the miracle of life and newborn babies, and it just makes him happy because he's just that like sweet man who
Bambi.
Just likes, he's Bambi.
Meredith, she's gonna have situations in the series repeatedly where she should have been fired or at least gotten a very, very heavy write-up. Like, it was one thing to go in and check on the baby and talk to the intern and be like, okay, that can be forgiven. That was a little bit like faux pas. You shouldn't do that. But that she went to the parents behind the doctor's back is a totally different story.
That's super wrong because it also creates distrust in the doctors in the building that you're not trying to do that.
Yeah. And just because she got lucky this time that her diagnosis was correct, it was not her place, not her patient, and she was just very lucky she was right. The correct step to do in this position was if you were seriously concerned, you still would have been out of line. She should have gone to the resident in charge in that situation and just had double check just totally unprofessional. I'm just imagining the tangent we would hear from Shelby if she was here.
Oh, yeah. For once, like, I agreed with Burke when he gave Meredith a what for on her behavior, saying that was completely inappropriate. And don't you ever pull a move like that again.
But I'm also going to come after the pediatrics intern as well, because she should have tested if it was benign in the first place. Meredith was right in that that test should have been run just to confirm the diagnosis.
And I think it was just a case of not only did she run it, but then she really dug her heels in, because it was like somebody was questioning her ability as a doctor, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean,
which it shouldn't, you should be able to remove your ego from the situation and do what's best for your patient. But
I mean, anybody who goes into med school is a perfectionist. We don't like to be wrong. But you need to learn that you're going to be wrong. Science exists to try to prove other theories wrong, to be able to find what the right course of action is. So whenever you go into science, expect to be wrong. Expect negative results. You're going to find them. Also along the Meredith storyline, unless you have more on the baby.
No, I'm good.
Okay, I want to talk about how she's carrying around the penis and a little bit more about Allison, our beating victim, because I guess, or sexual assault victim, because the rape kit was negative.
I missed that part.
Yeah, it was in her first surgery when I really actually like this part when Derek said, "We've got a warrior on our hands." The rape kit came back negative. She managed to fight him off. Yeah, she is a freaking warrior. Other than that, Meredith, poor Meredith, carrying around the penis. And she's still super rattled that she had the same shoes as her. And I kind of get that, because your mind makes connections that some people might write off as ridiculous, like Christina. But it's human nature to make these connections. Allison is very small, and her statistics are very similar to Meredith's. So it's natural for Meredith to think that it could have easily been her. She also just moved back to Seattle. She also doesn't really have family here, which is something that she expresses to Derek. And while we know this isn't necessarily the case, Christina has a stronger ability to distance herself emotionally, which can make her sometimes very cold. And she can sometimes be a little bit too good at distancing herself.
Yeah, which we find later on in the series with her relationships in general, is that she runs into trouble because she puts a wall up. And
she doesn't have the maturity or the practice of healthy coping mechanisms, so she just shuts things out. And this is why I think Christina gets so traumatized later in the plane crash and the shooting compared to the other doctors. I got a little bit off topic there, sorry. But Meredith, I think
spoiler alert, by the way. Big spoiler alert.
Yeah. I think we've already clarified this is definitely a spoilers podcast. But yeah, I think it's really normal for Meredith to make these connections.
Yeah. And continuing on the Meredith storyline, we see when she's talking with Derek outside of Allison's room. I mean, one really sad moment when Derek's like, "What do you mean? You have your mom." She'd call in this plethora of advanced surgeons to come get you and to come help with you if you were injured and all this kind of stuff. And Meredith's like, yeah, when in reality, like, her mom probably wouldn't even be aware that Meredith was hurt. So that was really sad. That was a deep moment. And then love their flirting banter. And thank God Meredith is into it, because otherwise Derek's comments are super sexual harassment.
Oh, heavily. I hate that I'm bringing down the room here a little bit. My heart had a little bit of a pang moment when Derek mentions that he would want his sisters by his bed if he was in a coma. And we know in season 11, when he's brain dead, Meredith does not call any of his sisters to be there at his bedside.
I did not catch that moment. Ouch.
Yeah, so that's something, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not in the way you think, because it's that feeling when someone you admire and like makes a really big mistake, and you're like, oh, I really don't want to think that they did that, just like when J.K. Rowling made those transphobic tweets. It's something you don't want to think about someone who you admire making such like a big mistake. Of course, Meredith didn't have any malicious intent, but it still made my heart hurt when he said that he wanted his sisters at his bedside.
And it makes me wonder if all along, I mean, Shonda, obviously I don't think Derek's death was necessarily planned all along, but if that was an inconsistency error later in the seasons, them not recalling what Derek told Meredith, or if it was just that little bit more of a jab.
So that was kind of the rough moment. I think the rest of my comments are positive comments. I'm bringing down the room a little bit.
Oh, I have another sad comment.
Oh, no.
But it's kind of like skipping to what happens next when the would-be rapist, sexual assaulter comes in, and Derek kind of goes into his room and after his surgery, and he's like, you're gonna get what you deserve kind of thing. The sad thing is he probably won't. Like, the fact of the matter is this guy's probably gonna get off with like a year of jail, maybe some probation.
The only thing that makes me feel better is that he is never having sex again.
This is true.
Not have a penis, as we see in our feminist moment in the OR when they talk about, oh, what a shame when they can't reattach his penis. But Derek also is like, it's satisfying the way he treats this criminal, but it's also unprofessional. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. Like, as much as you may hate someone, as much as someone is a terrible person, you still have to treat them professionally.
And I mean, we see this from Derek a lot in the future when there is a character who is a criminal that comes in for treatment. Derek is a repeat offender in terms of not being professional and letting his emotions show based on his past experience.
Oh, yeah. It would be totally unfair for us to come after Izzy like that and not address, like what you said with Derek, letting his personal feelings get in the way of medicine sometimes.
Yes.
He ends up having to perform a craniotomy and leave Allison's skull flap off, and this is because the brain swells. It has nowhere to go within the skull. So, in short, to keep the brain from hurting itself, he has to create more room for it to expand. I already talked about Derek's bedside manner, but his bedside manner for Allison is exactly the opposite, because he's with her and just cares so much about her getting better. So it's like night and day, and this is where we see the personal feelings getting involved again, but this time it's for the good.
I had a note. Are you almost ready to?
Oh yeah, I'm gone through my notes.
Wrapping up the episode, so I have a note about kind of the ending scenes of the episode. They go back to the nursery last time, and this is where Meredith tells Izzy and George they can move in with her. They're super happy. Christina kind of does a roll her eyes moment, and I love her line because it's like it follows her through the entire series. She says, I blame the babies. They make you toxic.
I feel myself in Christina.
Yeah. She says that, like, Meredith's getting suckered in by these guys, and she's just going, okay, you did this to yourself, kind of thing. That's my last note, though, before we do pick our character of the episode.
So we are choosing our person each episode from here on out. My person this episode, I wanted to choose Allison, but I figured that'd be a little bit too cheesy because she's a fucking warrior.
I had her on my list too.
I know, but I figured I'd be good and I would choose a main character. But I wanted to notice Allison because she is a tough cookie and she managed to fight off her attacker and bite his penis off when he sexually assaulted her and That is a fucking warrior if I have ever heard one. But other than that, I guess I chose Izzy Stevens, which is probably going to be one of the only times I will ever do that. Because she showed such a desire to help others, despite the circumstances. And I never thought I'd say it, but Izzy was my favorite this episode.
Well, great minds think alike, because when I was choosing my person for this episode, I also wrote down Allison first, and then I was like, but if I have to choose a core cast member or character, I also choose Izzy. She went above and beyond this episode, and she truly showed compassion in a way that some other doctors might not, if faced with the possibility that it would put her job in danger.
Everybody else this episode kind of fucked up.
Yeah, everybody else was like whiny or petulant or just like
crossed lines
that were super irresponsible. Not that Izzy didn't cross lines, but at least Izzy crossed lines to do something for somebody that never would have stepped up for themselves otherwise.
Yeah, I'm changing my theme. It's not badass bitches, it's crossing lines. It's Bailey is a badass bitch and crossing lines. There we go.
I told you. I said at the beginning of the episode, I think the theme is overstepping boundaries.
Yeah, that's a little bit more accurate. That's why you're the writer in this family. So that's all my notes. Do you have any more?
I don't. No, I think that's a wrap on episode 2 and episode 3. You will not be hearing my voice in that episode.
Boo.
I know. But Shelby will be back. She probably has better notes than I do because she's actually spent time doing practical work in a hospital, and I'm just the lovely Grace fan with a few camera angle and television network facts, which I'm not completely sure of, but I know about the writing process, so.
Yeah, I'm probably the least qualified person on this podcast, but at the same time, a perfectionist, so I will pick apart everything.
Yeah, at no point do we expect anybody to think that we are medical professionals or television professionals really in any way. We just love the show. We'll have talking about it.
I'm not a doctor. I want to be a doctor. I like doctor shows. That's about it.
Yeah, if you like a good recommendation for a few little snippets of a doctor giving his full explanations, Dr. Mike.
Oh, the real McDreamy.
Shout out to Dr. Mike.
The real McDreamy.
We love having these conversations, and in our link, we'll put the email if you want to write in any facts that you know about the episode or any little opinions that you want to share with us. And each week, we'll pick an email to discuss.
Yeah, and thanks to Anchor, we are available on several platforms. We are on Google Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on Anchor. I actually just got an email while we were recording that it got put in another platform, but I didn't check it yet, so I'm not sure what it is. But we are on a lot. It's in process to going on to Google and on to Stitcher as well. So we'll keep you updated.
Hi, this is Editing Hayleigh here. So all the platforms we're available on are Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
You can find us on any social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook. I gotta make a Twitter. I forgot about Twitter. We're gonna be on Twitter. And we want you to pick me, choose me, podcast me. Because it is a beautiful day to podcast.